Here are the top 10 future strongest Defense Force members. If you think number 1 is going to be Narumi or Kikoru, you're wrong. Let's start at the bottom of the list, which is Kafka Hibino. Because if Kafka didn't have his Kaiju powers, he would be the weakest member of the Defense Force. He's the only one who started out with zero compatibility with his combat suit. Not low, not below average, zero. And while he eventually managed to raise that to 1%, it took a ridiculous amount of effort. Just to put that in perspective, in the same amount of time, Kikoru's compatibility jumped from 46% to 55%, while Kafka was barely scratching the surface. But here's the crazy part. Even with just 1%, Kafka was doing things most soldiers couldn't. He was tearing up through dead Kaiju bodies like it was no big deal. That kind of strength, especially at 1% compatibility, is not natural. His growth might be slow, but Kafka is a grinder. He puts in the work, and while he might never hit the same compatibility levels as someone like Kikoru, it's not out of question for him to push himself to up to maybe 20 or 30% with enough time and training. And if that happens, well, who knows? Maybe he could reach a point where he doesn't need his Kaiju powers to take down smaller threats. Maybe, just maybe he could become a real force on the battlefield, all on his own. After all, he is already training hand-to-hand combat with Hoshina, so he might actually be useful. At number 9 is Aoi Kaguragi, just a normal soldier who casually drops Dai Kaiju like he's on lunch break. Compared to Kafka, who relies on his Kaiju powers, Aoi is a Defense Force member with decent potential. He relies on his suit and training in his fights against the Kaiju. He ranked first in the physical fitness test and had an initial 15% compatibility rate with his combat suit, which is already above average. After some training, he pushed that to up to 25%, which is no small feat. Considering that though, his growth seems to be reaching a plateau. Unlike standouts like Reno and Kikoru, who are considered prodigies, Aoi's potential might not increase much from here, but it is much higher than Kafka. Still, there's always a chance he could end up wielding a numbers weapon down the line. In terms of combat, he started out using a gun like most rookies, but later on he got a major upgrade, a custom pilot driver from Izumo Tech, and in chapter 102 he used it to take down a Dai Kaiju with a single strike. What's especially interesting is that he's been given a custom weapon even though he's not a captain, which says a lot. It might even hint that he's operating at a captain level already, or has the potential. So while Aoi might not be the flashiest or the most naturally gifted, he's a solid, dependable fighter who proves that even a normal member of the Defense Force can make a huge impact. And number 8 is Haruichi Izumo. Haruichi is the only guy on the list who might end up becoming the ace of the Defense Force, even without killing a single Kaiju. Izumo is top tier in academics and has solid potential on the battlefield as well. He started off with an 18% compatibility rate in his first test. Later, when number 10 attacked, he was able to raise that to 36%, which isn't too bad. He hasn't fought a Kaiju directly, but he has supported others from a distance. In chapter 102, he backed up Aoi Kaguragi from above, and using his bow to paralyze a Kaiju mid-fight. Compared to Kaguragi, who's all about raw strength and close quarters combat, Haruichi takes a more tactical, ranged approach. He's not the frontline brawler, but he's the guy making sure the brawler gets his opening. With his bow and arrow, Izumo's obviously great at ranged combat. We see this in chapter 100 when he attacks multiple Dai Kaiju from the helicopter. With just one arrow, the attack covered a large area, hitting multiple targets at the same time. The only problem is that even though he can use the toxinizers to paralyze Dai Kaiju, he doesn't have the firepower to handle them alone. He can't kill them with a couple of hits, at least not yet. With time, he could crank up both his range and power to the point where taking out multiple small Kaiju by himself isn't a problem. If his compatibility ever hits 70 or 80, he might be able to paralyze a dozen Kaiju at once, and at 90 he could probably drop them all with a single arrow. Of course, there's a chance he might never be the big damage dealer on the team, but still he's got everything it takes to be one of the best supporting fighters. And number 7 is Iharu Furuhashi. Iharu might just be the weakest fighter in the Defense Force, or the strongest. It all depends on how lucky the Kaiju is that day. On paper, he's nothing special. No jaw-dropping suit stats, no flashy numbers weapon, nothing that screams future legend. He's the kind of guy you expect to blend into the background during a mission. But then the battle starts. At first he's barely keeping pace. He looks like he's one swing away from being taken out. And then out of nowhere, He's driving a blow straight through a Daikaiju's core. That's exactly what happened in Chapter 102 when his compatibility rating jumped from 24% to a ridiculous 88% in seconds, letting him end the fight with a single hit. And that's the thing, Iharu is a flash adapter. His compatibility doesn't just stay at one level, it spikes, sometimes explosively, depending on the situation. One minute he's not a threat, next he's fighting like an entirely different soldier. Now imagine when he starts controlling those spikes, or trigger them at will. Kaiju naturally target the bigger threat first, so he could slip under the radar, strike when no one's looking, and take them down before they even realize he's there. That's textbook assassin work. And there's a chance that when his base compatibility increases to the 50s, his spikes might even hit high 90s, or maybe he can even surprise us with an immeasurable output that goes beyond 100. While Haruichi is the master of support, weakening enemies so someone else can finish the job, Iharu is the guy who can be that finisher. Not with steady blows over time, but with one explosive push that ends the fight in an instant. Next up is Rin Shinonome. She doesn't wait for a lucky break. Her strength is there from the first strike, and if she ever adds a numbers weapon to it, the league she plays in might change forever. Rin is a platoon leader of the 1st Division, and has already taken down multiple kaiju on her own. Again, Narumi even said that she had the potential to become captain someday. During her fight with Kaiju number 13, she had a 73% compatibility rate with her suit. Yes, she lost that fight still, but that wasn't because she was weak. If anything, that just showed how strong number 13 really was. Compared to Iharu, whose compatibility spikes wildly in battle, Rin's strength comes from consistency. She doesn't need sudden bursts of power to perform, she's reliably deadly from the start. If she can push her compatibility into the 80s or even 90s while keeping that same level of consistency, she could become almost unstoppable. And imagine pairing that with a numbers weapon, a suit or weapon forged from a Daikaiju's remains. That would give her an instant power spike, pushing her already high performance into a completely different league. With her skill and discipline, she could fully harness that kind of weapon without losing control, making her not just a captain candidate, but possibly one of the most dangerous soldiers in the defense force ever. At number 5 we have Mina Ashiro. She's already perfect in the eyes of the defense force, but perfection has its own kind of weakness. Mina is the captain of the 3rd Division and is also known as the strongest female captain of the defense force. She has defeated hundreds of kaiju in her career. According to Director General Itami, Mina is stronger than Gen Narumi when faced against giant kaiju. We saw proof of this in chapters 75 and 76 when she took up multiple giant kaiju one after the other. Itami had theorized that if Mina was there to fight against kaiju number 6, they could have reduced the damages that occurred. Even a kaiju like number 9 acknowledges her power and wants to take it for himself. Compared to someone like Rin Shinonome, Mina is on a whole different level in terms of raw power and battlefield presence. While Rin has the consistency and skill and potential to become a top tier leader, Mina's already there. However, Mina might already be at her peak. Her maximum unleashed combat power sits at an incredible 96% compatibility. There's almost no room to push it further. Same goes for her sniping skills, she can't really get any better. In other words, she's already maxed out as a soldier. Her only weakness is close range combat, for which she has Soshiro Hoshina to cover. And number 4 is Soshiro Hoshina. By one measure, no one in the defense force even comes close to him. He's a master swordsman, deadlier than Japan's strongest anti-kaiju combatant, Gen Narumi, when it comes to small and mid-sized kaiju. Against the smaller ones, he's practically untouchable, but that same specialty turns into a weakness against giant kaiju, especially since he can't use guns. That's where Mina Ashiro comes in, picking off the big threats from a distance while Hoshina slices through anything that slips past her line of fire. Together, they're the perfect tag team. Still, when it comes to pure combat skill, Hoshina has the edge. In his first battle with number 8, Hoshina overwhelms it with multiple attacks that were too fast to be dodged. Though number 8 wasn't fighting for real, he was still forced to admit Hoshina's power and speed. In his battle against number 10, he initially overwhelmed it, cutting off its limbs quickly, but soon it transformed into a giant kaiju, making his attacks useless. It took the combined efforts of Kikoru, Hoshina, and Mina to take it down. Just look at his fight with number 12, a monster built specifically to counter his sword style. It was a brutal back and forth, but Hoshina pushed himself harder than ever before, and until he became the only person in history to hit 100% compatibility with the numbers weapon. The only problem, hitting 100% means he's already at the peak of his abilities, and there's nowhere left to climb. But his skill, on the other hand, is a very different story. We saw him make a whole new sword move to deal with number 12, which clearly shows his physical force might have stopped growing, but skill still has some room. And number 3 is again Narumi. He's called the strongest anti-kaiju combatant alive. Yet there is one man he's never managed to defeat. Gen isn't just the captain of the Defense Force's 1st Division, the strongest division in the whole organization. He's also known across Japan as the strongest anti-kaiju combatant alive. Gen's talent showed long before he ever joined the Defense Force. He has this rare ability to draw power directly from kaiju tissue. In fact, in a side story, we even see him wielding the severed limb of a dead kaiju as a weapon, something normally only possible with specially designed uni-organs built for combat suits. In his first battle in the manga, Gen fought against Beta, a fusion of number 9 and an ant kaiju, and took it down without any trouble. His next battle was against number 9, who had fused with number 2 and Soshiro Hoshina. Kikoru, number 8, and Gen attacked him together. Even though they caused a huge amount of damage, number 9 still managed to escape. However, it was in the battle against number 11, a kaiju designed to specifically counter him, that his true abilities were shown. In the beginning of the battle, he's unable to read the monster's electrical signals, because it was made of water. This rendered his main abilities useless. However, he managed to evolve the ability of his numbers weapon in the middle of the fight, actually giving him the ability to see the future in a fight. This allowed him to defeat the monster in the end. While Soshiro Hoshina focuses on the sword and is limited to taking down small-sized kaiju, Gen is more of an all-rounder. He can do both melee and long-range attacks, making him the perfect soldier. When he first suited up for the Defense Force, he clocked in at a 24% compatibility rate on his very first try. Fast forward a few years, and as captain, he's pushing a staggering 98%, and that's in a regular combat suit. Also, here's a twist. Even with the title of the strongest, he's never managed to beat his former mentor, Hairuchi Shinomiya. And number 2 is Kikoru Shinomiya. She was built to be the strongest, until one member of the Defense Force rewrote the rankings. Kikoru being the child of 2 of the greatest fighters in the Kaiju Defense Force. When she first wore a combat suit, she was able to reach 46% compatibility, which is platoon leader class. She further improves her strength after marksman training, reaching 55%. After training with Gen, she was able to reach 84% compatibility, and going up to 94% at its highest when wearing Numbers Weapon 4. What sets her apart is her rare compatibility with Numbers weapons. She achieved Class 5 compatibility with Numbers Weapon 4, and Class 4 compatibility with Numbers Weapon 1, 2, and 7. This means that she can rise to greater heights using the other Numbers weapons. For example, in the final battle against number 9, she used the Numbers Weapon 1 to actually identify the core. This made it possible for number 8 to land the finishing blow and destroy number 9. It's not an exaggeration to say that the battle ended thanks to her. The addition of Numbers Weapon 1 and 7 mean that her versatility could increase a lot. The real question isn't how strong she'll get, but how many different ways she'll be able to win. At the number 1 spot is Reno Ichikawa. Reno's power is already terrifying, and he's still nowhere near his limit. He started from the bottom and ended up with the strongest numbers weapon. Initially, his compatibility rating was 8%, and this improved to 18% after shooting training, which was a drastic improvement. When wearing Numbers Weapon 6, his full release force was 43%, which he was able to increase to 51%. When he uses it in combat, he's a completely different beast. He's able to release high amounts of ice and freezing energy from his body. In Chapter 99, he froze 4 Kaijus at once. What makes Reno so exciting is that his growth curve still looks like it's pointing straight up. He's nowhere near his ceiling yet, and his weapon mastery keeps evolving. Not to mention the fact that he's got the weapon of the most destructive kaiju ever seen. Except kaiju number 9, of course, but the king of kaijus. Compared to Kikoru, who's already working at elite, almost maxed out compatibility levels, Reno's potential lies in how much further he can climb. Kikoru is a picture of versatility, switching between multiple numbers weapons for any situation. Reno, on the other hand, is a specialist. If he keeps sharpening his ice-based offense, he might become the Defense Force's ultimate trump card for large-scale, high-threat battles. While his rate of growth is slow compared to a genius like Kikoru, it's important to remember that he did improve tremendously. Also, the scope of future growth is crazy because he's only at 51% compatibility right now. There's a possibility that he could evolve the numbers weapon like Gen, and that just shows how much more potential there is for his growth. So these are the 10 future strongest Defense Force members, but these are the strongest kaijus. in Kaiju number 8.